the Art of Leadership Network.
Hey leaders, welcome to the Lead Culture Podcast, part of the Art of Leadership Network. I'm your host, Jenni Catron, CEO of the Foresight Group, a company dedicated to helping leaders develop thriving teams. Each week, I'll be your guide as we explore practical strategies to equip you with the tools you need to lead with clarity, confidence, and build unstoppable momentum in your organization. My mission is to be your trusted coach, empowering you to master the art of self-leadership so you'll learn to lead yourself well, to lead others better. Each week, we take a deep dive on a leadership or a culture topic. You'll hear stories from amazing guests and leaders like you who are committed to leading well. So let's dive in and keep learning on this leadership journey together. Friends, today I am joined by my friend, Mindy Caliguire. Mindy is the founder and president of Soul Care, an organization that exists to cultivate soul health among leaders and those they serve. She works with Christian leaders in ministry and marketplace environments, serving individuals and organizations around the world through the Soul Care Collective, an online community. I have known Mindy for many years. We've been acquainted and connected at different times, and I have always been struck by her thoughtfulness around the soul of the leader, the health of a leader. And y'all know that is a big mantra for me is what? Lead ourselves well to lead others better. And so today I get to have a fantastic conversation with Mindy around her new book, Ignite Your Soul. Listen to this. When exhaustion, isolation, and burnout light a path to flourishing. So friends, here is my conversation with Mindy Caliguire. Well, Mindy, thank you for joining me today. I have been looking forward to this conversation because every time you and I get a few minutes together, or I get to read a little bit of your work, I'm always a little bit convicted and also super encouraged because you are so intentional about the health of a leader. So I would love for you just to kind of start out for our listeners, maybe sharing where that passion came from for you of just, you're such an advocate for the importance of soul care in leadership. And I think it'd be great for everybody to kind of hear your story and how that became such a passion point for you.
No, I'm happy to. And I don't want you to feel convicted necessarily, maybe gently reminded and
the
encouraged.
Right kind of conviction.
Yes. Yeah, we'll put it in that category. It's delightful to be with you. I'm so grateful. So fun. And I agree. The few times I get to hang out with you, I reminded that I want to keep leveling up my own personal leadership. So I'm grateful for your work as well. So, okay. But to answer your question, yeah, you're welcome. It matters. You're doing great work out there, and it's leveling up the ecosystem of the organizations that you and I both support. It's really cool to see. But my passion for this really came out of my own story of a lot of brokenness. I, like many of us, kind of came to faith and college time frame and really felt like I wanted to pursue God with my whole heart, my whole career. I had gone to school at a very secular university environment. And so the call to ministry wasn't my initial response to the gospel. It was just like following God with your whole life. But that ended up pulling me and my husband into a variety of vocational ministry contexts and leadership contexts. And one of those, when we were in our 20s, was a church plant. So for those who know what a church planting is, it's a kind of an entrepreneurial venture where you're kind of launching out in your own to start a net new organization. No background, no history. We did this in a really tricky, hard place, and we did it in the hardest possible way. There are some organizations that support would-be church planters and provide coaching or accountability or encouragement, whatever, but we were completely on our own. Started our own 501c3, did the whole thing, raised the money, whatever. And great things did come of that, but the net result of the pressure and the stressors of that high intensity startup environment, I didn't know how to care for my soul as a leader. I would have been like, it's like, what is that? Like, we need to be strategic. We need to get after it. We need to like keep driving. There's urgency and there's strategy to be applied, and we need to harness our gifts and recruit other people in, and all the things that are normal parts of leadership. But this would have never been on my radar. A care of my own soul. Sure. And as a result, you know, the story really unfolded that I basically ran headfirst into a wall that I didn't know was there. And I ended up with, like, smart people kind of have language around, and we have more language these days around burnout or some of these kinds of things, but there was no language around that. And I just pushed harder and harder and ended up completely incapacitated. Like, I had neurological symptoms, had optic nerve and cerebellum, and all these other things were freaking out. And my like highly productive, highly generative, high energy, high fun factor, all those things, like, could not walk across the room without speaking my guts out. I was hospitalized several times. I mean, it was bad. It was crazy. Yeah. And the worst about it, like, I think a lot of us can endure a hard season if we know like what the healing arc of it is. Like, what's the pathology of this thing that just went wrong? So it starts here, then it looks like this, and the road to repair looks like this. But there was no road to repair. Nobody knew what was wrong with me. And so they had no idea if it would get better. And that is a scary place to be. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it really is. And so anyway, the reason I paint all that picture, I don't need to get into all the gory details of it, but it really brought me to asking a lot of different questions about what it takes to like, I was like, God, I'm like, I'm a team. This is not strategic. It's like, all my work isn't happening. And ended up with some different conversations with God. And it threw me, punchline into being very deeply convicted that I had to reorder my life around the well-being of my soul as a first order priority. Not once everything else is done, once I had nothing better to do with my time, but as a first order priority. And then let everything else that I'm responsible for or care about come out of that place of overflow. And that, I didn't know how to do that, Jenni. I was like, I just became convinced that the way I had been doing things was like not a really good solution to a sustainable life. Right. And further, wasn't the invitation Jesus had for us. Like, what if, like, this was not a picture of streams of living water. This is a picture of a mess. And I knew it wasn't God's fault. I became convinced that through mentors, friends, guides who helped me along the way, authors, that I just could open myself up to a different way of being in my own skin, a different way of being with others, and a different way of opening myself to God. And that turns out there's a whole body of historical thought around that that's called spiritual formation. But I didn't know that at the time. I was just trying to live. I was just trying to live. So that was how I became convinced that the gunning and gunning and gunning that I was actually pretty good at and was sort of what you get rewarded for. I became convinced that was not the path that God was actually inviting any of us into. And that the care of the soul, or reorienting around our life with God, was actually the path to the greatest flourishing and the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest living out of the belovedness that is who we are, that we can so easily lose sight of in the midst of our leadership. So that's my origin story. That's kind of how it all came about. And the good news is, like, every other opportunity I've had to lead now, many, many years since, because that was a very long time ago. Those have all sort of just happened. It wasn't a striving. It wasn't like, oh, here's my strategic plan to do this or achieve that. I've had a lot of opportunities to do wonderful and beautiful things, but they all sort of came organically as I continued to live from this resolve that I will.
Yeah.
Yeah. People say, well, what is soul care? It's like, well, on a couple of levels of answers to that. But at one level, the care of the soul is just my own personal way of life. That's what soul care is. Soul care is the way of life for me. But then it over the years has become a message that I feel compelled to bring. And then now it's an organization of people and resources and ways that we're trying to give lift to this topic globally. But the first two never go away. This is still my own way of life.
Right.
Full stop.
Right. Mindy, how do you coach? Thank you for sharing just kind of that backstory. I remember reading some of that in your book and thinking, I think if I were in your shoes, I would be, because I think I have a lot of similar that drive and push for making things happen and, pushing yourself too hard, too fast sometimes because you see all the opportunity. And I think a lot of leaders listening resonate with that. We're drivers. We make things happen. And I think if I were in your shoes, I would have been thinking, okay, what's wrong with my body? Why is my body not keeping up? Like I'm curious. I don't know if I would have gotten to, this is a soul care issue. I would have just started beating myself up for my body doing something crazy and wasn't keeping up with me. Like, do you find that with leaders that they have trouble acknowledging that when they're, there's that book that the body tells the score and how much our body actually is telling us. Yeah. Yep. It's telling us stuff. Yeah. But we don't listen well. Right. So I'm curious when you're coaching leaders, how do you get them? Maybe how do you coach me to actually begin to really acknowledge that your pace is unsustainable? Like, how do you get us to pay attention to that before we have the debilitating scenario?
Great question. I can tell you some of the answers from historically in my story, how I came to that if you want, but then I'll answer how do I try to help leaders. I won't, it wasn't some great, the clouds parted and all of a sudden I had this divine awareness. Okay. It was a gradual, because I was sidelined for months and very despairing at times. And, one of the first things that happened to me was in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. I mean, honestly, Jenni, this started with me telling God how not strategic this was. So I did not start in this deep, soulful place. Right. Can you imagine telling God what is and
That's
is not
helpful
strategic?
To hear because I probably have done it.
I joke about it all the time, but now even in this moment, I'm like, did I really do that? I did. I was like, this is not, there's things that aren't happening. There's meetings that aren't happening. This team is this project is this is not strategic. The stuff isn't getting done. Good Lord. Yeah. Okay. So that was, that was my flesh. I just want to identify with you. Yeah. It wasn't my first conclusion of, the inner fire of my soul is in trouble. That was not my thing. But I did get there. So some of the things that happened is in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. Oftentimes when people have chronic illness of some kind, that sleep becomes very difficult. And I sensed at one point, I was leading 3 different small groups at least, and running the back end of the church and all the list of holy things that I was holding at that time. Because that's who else is going to do it. You got to keep going. And I remembered God is super gentle and has the best sense of humor in the world. But he was talking to me in the middle of the night, hey, remember that verse in John 15 that you're having all 3 of your small groups memorize, which we all know. I bet everyone on this call, anyone on this listening, whatever one they hear it, knows. John 15:5. We know it well. The metaphor is repeated many times in that Last Supper. But in 15:5, John records that Jesus says, if you remain in me, you will bear much fruit. We love that part, right? There's the fruit bearing. We love that. But the second half of the verse is, apart from me, you can do nothing.
Nothing.
And I sensed God saying to me, Mindy, what part of nothing didn't you understand?
Wow.
And yeah, it is a wow. And I kind of had a bit of almost a spicy response over the years. My like engagement with that passage and that question has emerged, because I think in a lot of our evangelical circles, which is more where you and I find ourselves most of the time, there's a lot about nothing we don't understand, right? What did Jesus mean by that? Psalm 139 says there's nowhere I can go from the Spirit. Everywhere I go, God is always with me. And that's like prior to the gospel. The psalmist David understands this. There's nowhere I can go that's away from God's Spirit. And then Romans tells us there's nothing at all that can separate us from the love of God, neither height nor depth nor angels nor demons or anything upright. We know these things, deep theological truths. But then what did Jesus mean? What was he saying? Apart from me, you can do nothing. And that has forced me into trying to understand so let's go back to that verse and that metaphor of a vine and a branch, right? And there's a way that a grafted in branch gets connected to its source, to the vine. And when and as that connection holds, the life force of that vine flows through that point of connection and out and does in that branch whatever that kind of thing is designed to do. Like grafting is a whole thing, right? And people that are grafters that have pointed I don't know what they call themselves, but people who are experts, master gardeners. I don't think they call themselves grafters.
It works for me.
In any case, very non-technical term. The people who know stuff about this have told me, and this is beautiful, that two things about when you're creating a graft in a vine, like there's a vine that knows how to live, knows how to stay alive. That's why you graft a specialty fruit or flower into a thing that really knows. It's usually very disease resistant, drought intolerant. And that's what you look for in the base, a thing that really knows how to stay alive. And that's God.
Yeah.
And in order for a graft to take place, you have to create a wound in the source. And
wow.
And a fatal wound in the branch. If that branch does not get connected, if there is not a death of sorts and a reconnection to a source of life, that branch will never live.
Yeah.
And the second thing is when there's a wound in the source and a wound in the branch, you have to bind them together so tightly that the graft literally takes full.
Wow.
And I know, right? I've been so curious about that point. Like my parents are super sciencey. My whole family is. And it's like my dad was a scientist. And I was like, if you could look through like electron microscope or whatever they are and look at the literal juncture between a source and a branch, what does that look like when that bond starts to solidify and becomes permanent?
Right.
What does that look like? Because I think it's pretty cool that a completely separate entity can receive its life from this one. So,
wow,
that's what Jesus is talking about here. And a lot of our fruit bearing conversations, we kind of get our assignments from God. We get our orders. It's like, okay, I got it. I know what I need to do. And then the busyness of our work pulls us away from the point of connection. And then we're wondering why it's so hard, why we're so burnt out, why we're so tired, why even going through the motions of reading our Bible or having our quiet time. But like we can go through all that stuff and never actually be in a connecting way with God. So learning how your soul actually receives its life from God, that's what the Caring Soul is all about. Like, how do I receive my life from God? And so much of Jesus's language throughout the Gospels and the New Testament entirely is the language of relationship. It's the language of connection. It's not the language of performance. there are things we go and do, but the language of our relationship with him, and the reason I believe he repeats that metaphor so many times during this pivotal final conversation with his followers, is like, they have no idea, but the way he relates to them is about to fundamentally change forever.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to lay in a way of thinking that is going to sustain them through persecution, through great achievements, through great losses. And that's supposed to sustain us too. So anyway, that was one of the first things that started to indicate to me that there was a way that I was working that was actually apart from God.
Wow. Even though you were working, for God, in quotes, right? Yeah.
It's all God's stuff. It was all God's stuff. And that's the big, I think, hope for many who are in vocational ministry today, who are, or Christian leadership in any regard.
Sure. Yeah.
Pace of life is pulling them away from God as their source, which doesn't need to take 8 hours in a cave or anything. It's almost like a mentality.
Right.
It's an orientation.
Yeah.
Of how am I receiving my life from God, which really hasn't been the focal point for us. So that's kind of one of the answers to your question of how did it come to me that this was a soul issue? And then since you mentioned the body thing, and I do tell this story in the book, there was I started to spiral emotionally, and I was always the happy, joy filled, whatever, high energy, like not so comfortable with the negative emotions. But once it was clear the neurologist didn't know if I was ever going to get better, and I was pregnant, and the baby's coming, I was spiraling. And the doctor said, if she starts to really fall apart emotionally, that's going to compromise her ability to physically heal. So you better, to my husband, see if you can find a therapist or someone to try to support her. And by God's grace, a beautiful man, Dr. Lombardi in Boston, in one of the suburbs of Boston, would meet with me. And the first time I met with him, I was still like manifesting all these bizarre symptoms. Like my eyeballs were moving. It was bad. And so, I get to his office and he's asking me good, like onboarding questions about my family of origin and the last 5 years of our tenure in Boston and this kind of stuff. And he says to me, well, Mindy, I can't speak from a biological or physiological perspective because he's not an MD, but from a psychological perspective, you have forced out of your body what could never come out of your mouth, which was the word no. No, I can't keep doing this. I cannot be doing as a big therapist, so very responsible for. And those were the kinds of things that God gently started bringing my way that caused me to learn, okay, this is kind of an interior job. This isn't my body failing me. This is my body leading me to a different place. And, so that was a little bit of how that all happened and, how that happened. But how I help leaders now, that was the other half of your question. Did you have anything else you were going to say about that?
No, I was going to say, I would love for you to speak to, first of all, just you sharing your story. And I think so many leaders can connect with, just that drive, that push, that go. And you want to ignore the symptoms your body is kind of, trying to acknowledge. And you said something in the book at one point, a person with a parched soul goes from burnout to burnout, gradually collapsing emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And I loved the words parched soul really stood out to me. And you talk about that a lot through the book. You go on to say, when we feel that severe lack, the kind of burnout we can't find our way out of, we often remain unaware that it's our souls that are cracked and undernourished, arid and hot and prickly. But that last phrase, that everything is unsatisfying, like that, ooh, because I can think about different times in my life and my story where it's like, nothing is technically wrong, but you've just been moving at such a pace that you're not enjoying anything anymore. And I'm assuming that's a symptom, right?
Yes.
Like
It is.
Our body is screaming at us.
Yes. We'll stick with that word symptom for a minute, but I do want to go back and tell you some of the fun ways that I love helping leaders kind of think about this. But the symptoms, I've done a lot of work about thinking with folks about how let's go back to that point of connection, Jesus' words. Part of our challenge is that the actual root of the word, not the root, the Greek word for soul, we, in the evangelical context and many ministry contexts, we only talk about the soul with reference to its eternal destiny.
Right.
We only talk about if souls are saved or unsaved, lost or found, but we have lost, and I do think this has been the case in church history, but in modern times, in my faith tradition, we have largely lost our capacity to talk about a soul that is saved, but might not be well.
That's an important distinction.
So it's vital. And if we can't recover the imagination that says, my soul is very much saved and also not well right now. But if we conflate those two things and we say that by virtue of being saved, a soul is fundamentally well, and there's nothing else to talk about for the rest of your journey, just try to behave like Jesus and do a good job. We've lost. This is why the spiritual formation conversation is so critical in this path, not as an optional, like if you got, a couple extra candles around that you want to light, go do the spiritual formation thing. It's like, no, this is inherent in our understanding of the regeneration of the soul. And the soul, biblically, in Matthew 16, I can benefit if you gain the whole world but forfeit your soul. That verse, the word for soul is suke, the Greek word suke, P-S-U-C-H-E. And it is the exact same word that is translated life in the verse prior. You save your life, you lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you'll find it. Well, it's not like Jesus was doing this high discipleship challenge in verse 25 and then turning around and talking to the crowd and trying to get them to come follow him. It was not a discipleship shift. Now we're talking evangelism between those two verses. We have to recover an integrated understanding of how God has created the human soul, that it actually is your whole life. And your whole life can be doing well or not so well, even if saved.
Right.
So, recovering that is a key part of it. But then if it has a quality of life, it can be doing well or not so well, then we can start having different conversations about symptoms, which is the word you were using. What are symptoms of when my soul is doing well or not so well? And Jenni, I've done this exercise with leaders all around the world in all kinds of cultures, socioeconomic ranges, ethnicities. When you work with a group of people or even just an individual and start having them think about their life when it's deeply connected to God, not to truths about God, but like real time in the moment, I feel like I have a lived sense that God is with me and for me, right? When that connection has been lost, we might still believe in God, we're still saved, we know all kinds of things and are quite resolved in our even devoted service to God. But when we disconnect, when life gets running and gunning, we get busy, we forget about God, we forget that we forgot, but we can still teach at a conference, we can still engage with our donor base, we can still do all the things, but we've disconnected. You ask people, what are the symptoms? How do I start to act and think and feel and relate when I've lost that sense of connection? And that's when I'll write up on a whiteboard or whatever, a whole list of things. And it would usually include something like what you just said. I've lost my ability to feel anything anymore. Like I've lost, right? So that would be one of a list, but I see all kinds of things, very predictable things that show up across all different kinds of people, business leaders, ministry leaders, moms, like any group. They all report the same kinds of things. Conversely, you ask, what was a season of your life? Whatever was going on around you and whatever your particular rhythms or things were at that time, when was a time that you knew that God was with you and for you?
Hmm.
When you think back to that time in your life, maybe you've had many, hopefully could be right now, could have been 3 years ago, could have been not last week, but the week before or something like that. But I have everybody think about it. And so are you doing that? You have to think about a time for you when that was true.
Hmm.
You got one?
The first thing that came to mind was when I made the giant leap of moving from my hometown in northern Wisconsin to Tennessee for school. Well, actually, when I left for my internship, and I just knew that it was what God had for me. I just had this deep sense that it was all going to be all right, and that God was with me in the craziness of it. My parents thought I was nuts, right? And
Yep.
but there was just this deep sense of, I'm good. God's got this.
So what I love doing, what I love doing is having people anchor that season of their life in their head. And you do this with whole people. It's so fun, even online. And then what I want you to think about, you just started to say a few of those things. Then you ask the question, what naturally flowed out of you in that season?
Confidence.
That season marked by deep real-time connection. What flowed out of you?
Yeah.
Confidence?
Yeah, just confidence, conviction of just that sense of knowing that I was doing what I needed to do in that season. I wasn't fearful. And there are times where I will recollect that moment and go, why was I so confident, not fearful, trusting? Mm-hmm. And how do I get back to her? But really, it's how do I get back to God, right? So those are the things that come to mind.
And I would say, and there might have been certain things that supported that level of connection that you had. Mm-hmm. But often we look to the things that we were doing rather than the point of connection is the main point.
Yeah, completely.
So in different seasons of life, there's going to be different things that support that level of real-time connection. Mm-hmm. And what we can end up in trouble where we're like, oh, well, I know what worked for me. Because back then I was in a small group and I was leading a small group and I was journaling for 45 minutes a day and I could run by the river every Saturday for 2 hours or whatever it was. And then we're like, oh, I have to get back to that. And it's like current life circumstances will never allow you to return to a way it used to be. Usually we can learn from the past or whatever, and we should, but sometimes we put undue pressure on a version of our life in the past rather than having an exploration to say, what are the things now that help me reconnect in real time? It's fun.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are
cool.
Those are some of the things I do with leaders. But that dry feeling you were talking about, the parched, that nothing.
Yeah. Yep.
Sometimes I think that, and I wrote an article. You can do everything with culture. I was just starting to speak to the topic of culture from a soul care perspective in organizations, and I was making the comparison to when souls are unhealthy in a culture. It's kind of like the zombies in the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh,
because, right, they're the dry bones. They're dry bones. Mm-hmm. They've lost their ability to taste. They can't taste pleasure. They can't die. They are the undead. But do you remember in those movies, the way, there was only one way you could tell if you were fighting against a zombie or an actual human. And it was when they were in the moonlight. It was like when you would catch them in a certain light. Mm-hmm. Then you would know that they were the undead. They were part of that zombie armies. Which I know sounds a little trite or lighthearted as it relates to leadership, but
it's a great visual. Yeah,
it is, because we become the undead. We'll never stop, but we've lost our capacity for pleasure. We've lost our capacity for pain, and you can't even tell. But when you catch us in the right light, it becomes clear.
You see it. Yeah.
There's no book.
That's powerful. So Mindy, as we're starting to wrap up, I mean, gosh, I could keep talking to you about this for so long, and people need to just go get the book and like dig into your resources. But for the leaders listening who, leaders hold disproportionate influence over the cultures we lead, the teams we're influencing. One of the things I notoriously say is lead yourself well to lead others better. And how would you coach them? They're hearing you, they're saying, ooh, I wonder if I need to be paying attention to this for me, for my team. How would you encourage a leader to take a next step towards leading themselves to, a healthier place, and as well as leading their teams?
Yeah. I mean, and I do hope the book would be helpful. It's got a pretty clear path that would be supportive to people wanting to take a next step and helping you sort of identify, is this really where I'm at? And our website and resources we have for leaders, there's lots of good stuff there. But what I would start with, honestly, is just in the context of our conversation today, is maybe reframing this from I don't want people to feel convicted by this. I want them to feel that there's hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it doesn't have to be this way. And you're not wrong or bad. And you're not like, it's usually, leaders are the most disciplined people on the planet. It's not like they lack discipline.
Right.
What I think we lack is the vision for how our lives and our team's lives would be different if we were functioning out of deep connection. We just talk about vision all the time. And I almost got in an argument with a leader one time. It was a kind-hearted argument, but Dallas Willard had this 3-part framework for change: vision, intention, and means. You have to have a vision of what will be different. Then you make your intention individually and as another vision. And then you find the means. What are the ways that I make progress on this vision? And oftentimes we just try to focus on the means or how to live a life of deeper connection. I would say that is the wrong place to start. This is not a time to get like a new gimmick for your journal, a new gimmick for prayer. There's 1,000 ways to pray, 1,000 ways to journal, 1,000 ways to have silence and solitude, or spiritual friendship, or any of the other things that are pathways, practices, and guides. They're all of them are good. What is lacking, and this is what this leader and I said, I laid out this vision, intention, means, and he was very familiar with it. He knew Dallas as well. And he said, he goes, oh yeah, what we lack is the intention. We're just not disciplined enough. We're just, I know the means, but we're just not disciplined. And I said, Dan, I don't think that's the issue. I think you don't have a clear vision of what would be different in your life if you were really living out of a healthy soul. Yeah. If your leadership was flowing from a healthy soul, that decision almost makes itself, and you will find pathways. And so I think for many leaders, if anything you're hearing today is resonating, go for a walk by a river or pull out the pages of a journal and start to reflect on, do I like the way it feels to be in my life right now? Do I feel connected to God? Of course, truths about God. Of course, you're really smart and hardworking. Those are table stakes. But what is your real life connection to the living God? Like right now, like today, like as I'm talking, how are you? Does it feel like, a conversation with a familiar friend, or like, I got to blow the dust off of this point of graft and reconnect? And again, no shame. Let's all understand that craziness happens. Storms come. Branches fall off. The question is, what are we doing to reconnect? And so I don't think anyone makes really good headway until, like Jesus saying, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want?
Mindy, that's so good. So good. If you all haven't
I love talking with you.
If y'all haven't grabbed the book, it's called Ignite Your Soul: When Exhaustion, Isolation, and Burnout Light a Path to Flourishing. And Mindy, I'm so grateful for your work. Thanks for going first and going through, we wish we wouldn't have to go through the hard places in order to help lead others to healthy ones, but you did it, and you're helping lead us to healthier places. So thank you so much for your investment in us. Where can people learn about you, connect with your work?
Yeah. Our website is just soulcare.com. So that's an easy way to find it. The book is available on Amazon and all the places. And our team is pulling together a lot around our social media account, especially on LinkedIn or LinkedIn and Instagram. So those are other good places people can find us.
Perfect. Mindy, thank you so much. We're so grateful for your investment in us as leaders, and appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks, Jenni. I'm delighted to. Thanks for your time.
Friends, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mindy. I hope it got you thinking about just doing that good inventory of how is your soul? How are you doing? Are you parched? What are some of those symptoms? What are the things you need to be paying attention to ensure that you are showing up healthy as a leader? You know how critical it is to lead yourself well in order to lead others better. And so I want to encourage you, go grab Mindy's book, get it for your entire team. Spend some time talking about and getting honest about the health of your soul, because it matters so critically for your health, your team's health, and ultimately the mission of your organization. I'd love to hear what you thought about this week's episode. You can connect with me on Instagram and Facebook at Get Foresight, or on LinkedIn at the Foresight Group. And I would love it if you would share it. Again, share this with another team member and then talk it through. Share it with somebody you trust and you want to have an honest conversation about your health as a leader, the health of your soul, and then take action. And if you're looking for more leadership resources to help you and your team thrive this year, make sure you are signed up for our free Insights Weekly newsletter. Just go to getforesight.com. That's GET, the number 4, SIGHT, and a little pop-up will show up. You can sign up. You get weekly email from me with articles, insights, things that I'm not sharing anywhere else. I'm sharing with y'all first. So be sure you're signed up for that. And if you haven't yet, go to culturemattersbook.com and pre-order your copy of Culture Matters. Tons of bonus materials for you. You'll immediately get the first 3 chapters so you can start getting to work on the culture framework. So that's culturemattersbook.com. All right, friends, thanks for listening today. Keep leading well, and we will see you soon.